Listen closely. Breathe slow. Let the hum of the room become a distant ocean, and let your thoughts drift with it, gentle as dust motes in a shaft of light. I will speak softly, like someone reading by candle in a vaulted chapel, and I will carry you far from here, not to a place of comfort, but to a place where comfort is quietly rewritten. We begin in the hush before the storm. The galaxy is a vast hush of midnight glass. Imagine, if you will, a city of stars stacked like cathedral spires, each one a pale beacon in an enormous black. Between them is the long, cold breathing of space, a slow inhale of radiation, a whisper of vacuum. Our story brushes against one of those beacons, a world called Armageddon, and it arrives like an old memory, the kind that tastes of iron and rain. Armageddon is the sort of planet that remembers war as if it were weather. Its skies are layered with coal-thick clouds. Storms roll across the continents like freight trains, and the winds carry the tang of salt from oceans and the sharper tang of ozone from engines. Steel cities crouch under the horizon like sleeping beasts, their rooftop pylons and antennae trembling when the thunderlift carriers pass above. The ground itself is pocked and scarred from battles long past, ringed with trenches that hold the memory of feet and fuel and fire. The planet breathes smoke and oil and a quiet, tireless sorrow. Begin with a small sound, distant vox chatter, a whisper in a long line of transmissions. It comes through low and even, the kind of human noise that makes a night feel lived in. A mother's hush, a worker's tired laugh, the crackle of someone checking instruments. On Armageddon, that sound is made stale by war. Every voice is threaded with the fatigue of generations. But for a moment, the voice is soft and ordinary, and the world listens. This is a galaxy of contradictions. Magnificent engines sing of progress and empire, while hovels and shrines show the slow hunger of souls. Massive arcologies hold millions, and yet between the towers the alleys breathe with gutter life. The imperial creed is spoken with the same cadence a prayer might hold, steady, reverent, and a little afraid. The machine god is revered in whispered canticles where priests bathe in oil. The emperor is adored in the furtive, devoted tone of those who are certain they must believe. These are the hymns that lull some newborn child to sleep, and they are also the songs that will be twisted later into something else, softer at first and then unbearably sharp. Into this landscape step the characters of our tale. Not all of them are people in the small, warm sense. Some are great constructs of alloy and oath, bodies built for a purpose so absolute it leaves little room for the needless clutter of doubt. They move with the steady, sealed grace of a clock made for battle. Space Marines, titans of living armor and devotion, each step measured and inevitable. They are warriors forged and remade until the man inside is more ritual than memory. Their voices, when they speak, are layered with vox-filtered calm and a distance that feels like a winter lake, impossible to see through, but reflecting everything back. And then there are the human things, those who have not surrendered entirely to ceramite or servo or liturgy. We will meet a few. A commissar whose hands are thin from pen and whip. A factory priest with oil-darkened robes who fingers the teeth of an ancient cog as though it were a rosary. A scavenger who remembers what grass once felt like beneath unarmored feet. They keep the small, soft habits of humanity. The sharing of bread, the telling of old jokes, the making of tea in a world where tea is an act of defiance. Hold on to those small things in your mind. They will feel vulnerable later, and that fragility matters. I will speak of a single horizon line now, the theater called Armageddon's northern continents, where sky-piercing forges and slag fields meet ruined Gothic cities and farmland that still fights to remember wheat. In this long, low meadow of ruin, an old war is becoming new, like a bruise that darkens at the edges and then blooms inward. You can sense it before you see it, a pressure behind the bones, a tightening in the chest as the air itself seems to hold its breath. That pause is the calm that happens just before the storm gives its first true howl. The first character who is important to us is a space marine captain named Lysander Verrill. not to be confused with any other Lysander, because here names are like echoes and often repeat, but do hold this one in the mind. He is a man shaped by ritual and steel. When he walks, the servos of his power armor whisper against the world like a concealed choir. His helmet is often carried under arm in moments of intimacy with his squad. And there, behind the polished lenses of matte ceramic, is a face more map than person, with scars that are catalogued like medals and a mouth lined in disciplined austerity. In the quiet before battle, Lysander stands at the edge of the city and watches the weather. He smells the rain and remembers the smell of his mother's kitchen from a life that, for him, is folded away like an old letter. There is another figure to know, shifting in the twilight behind Lysander's ordered life. Father Regencier Malkyr, a tech priest with more mechanica than flesh. He is a creature of soft metal and prayer. Where human hands once moved, he now carries articulated servitors and implements. His voice is threaded with an echoing solenoid hum. He worships mechanisms the way others worship saints. His faith is not warm but ritualized, a precise set of motions he repeats because they make sense of the chaos. When he hums to the ancient engines, they hum back, because whatever else has been replaced in him still believes in the comfort of gears meshing. There is a tenderness to Malkyr's actions, odd and sterile. He cleans a broken bearing like someone tucks a child into bed. Closer to the ground and more ragged in appearance is a woman named Ghazghkull, a scavenger and former farmhand. Her hands know how to coax life from rock. She can find a hidden pipe, a buried battery, a seed that still sleeps. She keeps a small charm, a smooth seed pod she found beneath a ruined temple, and sometimes she presses it between her fingers in the same rhythm as if she were counting rosary beads. Those beads are a private rebellion against forgetting. Jessa's voice is gravel and smoke, but when she speaks softly to the land, the soil seems to answer with a damp, patient smell of loam. These figures, Lysander with the measured step, Malkyr with the sacred tools, Jessa with the seed pod, form a triangle within the city, each anchored by different loyalties. Between them, the planet breathes and prepares. In the far distance, something else breathes too, forces that do not speak our language, or those who speak it in a broken, honeyed accent that insinuates itself like mold. The enemy is not simple. Armageddon has known Orkwag, rumbles and tyrannid hunger, and it has worn the iron collars of chaos mutterings like a fevered scarf. In the years leading to what we call the battle for Armageddon, rumors seep through the Vox networks, whispers of fleets assembling beyond the planet's ionosphere, of banners that smell of ozone and iron, of dreams shared among soldiers that end with the same jagged emblem carved into their palms. We begin with calm because calm is deceptive. It is the blanket you don't notice until it's pulled away. Hear the soft mourning, a slow rain hitting the corrugated rooftops, a distant factory starting its breathwork, the creak of a transport cable, the low, muscled thrum of a landship powering its engines. At first, the narration is as gentle as a lullaby. The Vox carries soothing instructions: hold position, await orders, ration water, tend the wounds. The words are practical, a quiet guide in a world where the lights flicker and the candles are rationed. But listen more carefully beneath the instructions. There is a thin, wavering hum under the voice, the faint, barely audible tick of something inside the power armor that shouldn't be there. A servo groan in the dark, a small whisper that flakes off the radio like dry paint. Initially, the crew of a ruin-clearing unit will laugh off the noise. Old servos, they will say, nothing to worry. That laugh will sound weirder as we listen to it stretched long across the pages of the morning. It will sound like a laugh that is trying to recall how it once meant something else. World building here is not facts piled in neat blocks. It is the slow unveiling of sensation. The taste of iron on the tongue during the first raid, the sharp, metallic tang that rises up if you cough too much smoke. It is the echo of banners against stone. It is the way the wind seems to carry voices that belong to other places. Sometimes the simplest sensory line says more than a paragraph of exposition. The cold press of a gauntleted hand on a cheek that used to belong to a lover. The way the light through broken stained glass makes a soldier's breastplate look like the face of a saint gone wrong. And as we set the scene, we must begin to seed doubt. The machine god's prayers, whispered in the cathedral forges, are perfect and precise, and sometimes precision slips. A cog will jam with a sound like a throat clearing. A Vox transmission carries a word that wasn't meant to be said. A child will draw a picture of a battle, and if you look closely, the shapes in the sky will not be craft but faces. These little misprisions accumulate. At first they are curiosities best explained away. Fatigue, superstition, weather. Later they will be fingerprints. Now let us move gently into the theme of humanity lost. Space Marines were not made merely for war. They were carved from men whose lives were surrendered to the liturgy of duty. In the warm, washed-out hours of early morning, Lysander will remember the feel of rain on hair and the softness of a blanket, memories he keeps like contraband. But the armor insists on being entire. Servo muscles remember a different grammar than skin. When Lysander removes his helmet, there's a small ritual, a breath, a release. The inside of the helm is a cave of technical marvel and ritual incense. And sometimes when he stands in that quiet, he hears the ghost of a lullaby his mother once hummed, transposed by the filtering of his implants into something like the cadence of a marching order. Malkyr, faithful to metal, will, at night, oil the hinge of an old servitor with the devotion of someone reading scripture. His hands, now more bronze than bone, tremble when he thinks of memory. He may not dream in the old human way. His dreams are of schematics and bearing tolerances. Yet even his mechanical slumber is haunted by a curiosity. When a bearing fails, what does it whisper before it breaks? He listens for the voice of the machine, and sometimes the answer is silence. Sometimes the answer is a sound like breathing. And Jessa, whose palms know the planet's skeleton like a midwife knows bones, will keep a small stash of seeds that she will plant in ruined gutters and under the eaves of blast-scarred walls. She will tell the seed stories, half to herself and half to a past she refuses to relinquish. In the soft, private hour when the city seems to pause, she will press the little seed pod to her lips and wish, as quietly as a prayer, that something of the old soil remain. We keep the mood gentle because the slow creep of horror is most effective when it begins wrapped in tenderness. Imagine a lullaby whose melody slips a single dissonant note almost unnoticed. The note is harmless at first. By the time the listener notices, the melody has been altered at its core. We will repeat motifs in this way: the soft hum of a forges, the thin crack of rain, the scraping of servo gear. These are the threads that will be pulled. From here, the scene widens like a pupil. Flocks of transport craft blot out the stars as they arrive, their bellies heavy with soldiers and ordnance. Scouts bring back glimpses of enemy formations, not just steel and color, but shapes that do not fit neatly into the human mind. The city tightens its belt. People go to work in the forges with faces like stone. Priests chant shorter prayers. Mothers tuck their children in twice. The war, which had been a distant thunder, is now visible as a bruise on the horizon. We feel the planet shift, as if woken. Sound design in our heads is crucial. The whine of drop pods, a low rattling like teeth in a skull, the thud of an artillery impact far enough away to be more felt than heard. Imagine each sound as a little pebble dropped into a still pond. The ripples travel outward and meet one another in strange patterns. A child's laughter in an alley intersects with a terrified whisper in another, and together they form a texture the planet can't smooth. Before we close this section, it is important to let the reader rest enough to believe they are safe, because safety will be used as a lever. We describe a quiet evening, Lysander sitting on a parapet, watching rain smear the city lights. Malkyr at his bench polishing a toggle with a practiced tenderness, Jessa planting a single seed by moonlight. The narration is slow, the cadence is measured. Each of these moments should feel like the last before sleep. The world is breathing, regular and predictable. But remember the small, strange things. A child who wakes feeling watched but sees nothing. A servitor that pauses mid-task and turns its head toward the sky. A factory bell that tolls 13 times instead of the usual 12. Save these details in your memory. They will be the breadcrumbs down a corridor that leads into the dark. We will stop now for the moment with the first thin crack in the glass. A distant alarm, softer than the rest, like a cough that clears the throat of the city. It is barely audible over the rain, but it carries a density that makes the marrow in the bones listen. Lysander rises without thinking, fingers finding the familiar grooves in his bolter. Malkyr's servos whisper awake. Jessa, ash on her hands, looks to the sky and presses her seed pod into the soil as if to pin something down. There is, in this hush, an interesting and terrible thing. The sky of Armageddon is not just dark, it is expectant. An expectation, when held too long, becomes a pressure that demands release. Our world is at that yawning moment. We have been lulled to sleep by story and by ritual. Now the horizon is beginning to bruise, and the first cries of the battle have begun to gather like storm clouds. Keep your breath slow. Let the images settle. In the next part of this tale, when the nature of the threat unfurls and the early seeds of horror take root, we will move more quickly. For now, keep the lullaby in your ears and the faint laughter of the city in your bones. We are still, for the time being, only observing. But as the rain becomes heavier and the alarms sharper, you will feel the tide that pulls everything under, and you will know that the calm we began with was only the opening chord of a symphony that will not end quietly. Listen again, softly. Breathe so slowly that the world seems to slow with you. The first section led you across a rain-slick parapet and into the hush before the storm. Now let us sit with the bones of the people and machines who live on Armageddon, who fight, pray, tinker, and forget in equal measure. This chapter is an anatomy. We will examine their faiths and failures, their habits and hardware, their small, human textures and the monstrous shapes that hunger beneath. We will trace the nature of factions and the character of those who are dragged toward war, pulling each thread gently until the tapestry tightens into something uncanny. Begin with patience. The narrative voice remains syrup slow, a voice that coaxes details from the dark like steam rising from a pot. We will speak of many kinds of being. Some have names and manners. Some are living machines. Some are myths made flesh. Understand that each faction is not merely an army but a philosophy made visible, a way of thinking about the universe turned into metal, teeth, and ritual. To know them is to see what they sacrifice to remain what they are. Space Marines first, silvered, ritual-bound, inevitable. Think of a Space Marine as a poem translated into battle. Their lines are carved into alloy and oath. They are bred for an extremity of purpose, to stand where others fall, to make war an art form of survival. Under that helmet, the man who might once have known a village or a mother is sheared into discipline. Their nature is paradoxical, simultaneously magnificently human and monstrously crafted. Their bodies are an instrument. Their identity is a drumbeat that drowns the whisper of personal desire. Imagine the slow intimacy of ritual in a squad chamber. There is a tonal hum, an engineered litany spoken soft as prayer while armor plates are oiled. The veteran hands know the cadence of each buckle and bolt. They touch each other's ceramite not as an equal but as a reliquary, checking seals, whispering a blessing into the microphone mesh that warms the skin in a way memory rarely does. The Space Marine soul, if such a word is still exact enough, is not lost so much as catalogued. It becomes a ledger of duty. Name, date of induction, deed, wound, holy vow. What remains of the man is measured in duty ticks and ritual counterpoints. There is a particular kind of calm that Space Marines cultivate. It is not the softness of sleep, but the steady freeze of someone who has learned that panic kills the man beside you. In battle, a Space Marine's heartbeat is a metronome that cannot be hurried. It dictates the squad's breath, and the breath becomes a vow. When Lysander Verrill steps into a ruined square, he does so with a slow inevitability. He notes the angle of smoke, the pattern of ricochet, the childlike sketch of a foe etched into the city wall. He catalogues, remembers, and then looks away. This detachment is not cruelty, it is function. But detachment, overlong, atrophies tenderness. A life measured only in purpose accrues rust where once there was skin. The Space Marine's tragedy is the trade. Identity for utility, memory for clarity. He can recall battle tactics with perfect fidelity and forget the taste of bread. He remembers how a comrade breathed their last with surgical accuracy, but not the color of the sky over a village he once called home. This forgetting is a kind of ache, a phantom limb of humanity that warms sometimes at the edges when a lullaby is heard through a vox filter. These moments are like salt on a closed wound, sudden, bitter, and oddly precious. Shift a fraction of a breath and consider the Imperial Guard, the human tide. Where Space Marines are carved stone, the Imperial Guard are weathered cloth. They are not made to be perfect. They are made to hold. These soldiers are the continent's knuckles, numerous, mortal, and stubborn. A regiment's nature is defined by endurance. They keep the line until the line stands or collapses. Their courage is quotidian, the kind that cooks in kettles and dries in the sun, the kind that is born from the continuing, small decision to wake and fetch water. The Guard's rituals are simple. Cigarettes shared beneath wind-gnawed banners, letters folded with trembling precision, the passing around of a photograph that will always get wet. In their marrow is hunger and laughter, fear braided with stubborn jokes. Where Space Marines have an engineered hush, Guardsmen carry a chorus of human sounds, a laugh, a sob, a curse. They anchor the planet's humanity in its raw, flawed state. Their nature is sacrificial in the most intimate sense. They are the offering the planet makes again and again to stay breathing. There is a body horror that afflicts these human soldiers, too, but it is subtle. Think of uniforms stuck to skin with frozen blood like dried leaves, of hands that tremble because they have held a child's head in both palms and watched life leak through fingers. The Guard is haunted by hunger and mud, and the simplest things, a hot meal, a letter, become reliquaries. Their humanity is loud, messy, and therefore unbearably vulnerable. Their courage is the kind that refuses to let the planet forget itself. Step closer now to the tech priests. The nature of a tech priest is a hymn converted into metal. They live where function and faith conjoin. For them, machines have saints. Rust is a sign of sin. Their liturgy is lubrication. Their confessions are calibrations. Father Regency or Malkyr is not simply a mechanic. He is a priest who hears sermons in pistons and perceives salvation in a perfectly seated gear. His body, a tapestry of bronze, wire, and careful incision, is proof of a devotion that has replaced the warmth of flesh with the cool comfort of a well-tuned engine. The tech priest's faith is obsessive. Where a mother might worry over a child's cold, a tech priest worries over a circuit's impedance. Where a lover murmurs a name at midnight, the priest speaks the registration number of an ancestral engine and calls it a blessing. They recite the names of components like psalms, rotor, stator, bearing. Such devotion is both sublime and claustrophobic. The tech priest achieves clarity at the cost of empathy. He becomes a lens through which the world is measured by tensile strength and wire gauge. In quieter moments, he might feel a defect, a tiny crack across the crescent of his memory like a hairline fracture, and be unable to tell whether the absence he notices is of flesh or of a story he no longer bothers to tell. Yet there is also tenderness in the tech priest, if you know where to look. When Malkyr wipes an old bearing clean, he does it with the same care a grandmother might use when tucking a child into bed. That care is not human warmth but reverence. Reverence for a thing that performs. The tech priest loves the reliability of gears because they are honest. They either work or they fail, and in that binary the priest finds meaning. That meaning is seductive. When a machine obeys, the priest feels as if a prayer was answered. Not all machines are obedient. Some whisper. Among the hummed harmonics of servitors and the discreet clinking of tool arms, There are frequencies too low for the unaugmented ear. These sounds can be mistaken for wind or for the settling of hulls. But sometimes, in the hours before dawn, Malkyr will think he hears a pattern in the groan of a generator, a cadence that suggests intention. He will lean close, place his hand against the warm casing, and feel a vibration that is almost like a heartbeat. This moment, the priest identifying a pulse in metal, is the hinge upon which horror can swing. Now imagine the invading force, the Ork Wayag, not as a cartoon of violence but as a biological philosophy turned into culture. Orks are simple on the surface. They crave battle shamelessly, but their nature is deeper. They are a pack thought, a gestalt that amplifies itself through numbers and instinct. Their society is built upon making noise and looking for challenge. The Ork sees armor as an invitation, a thing to decorate with trophies. The Wayag is not only a war but a fever that spreads like mold. The more it consumes, the larger and wilder it becomes. An Ork is an animal personified. They smell like sweat and fuel, and their culture is a soundscape of crude music and clangs. To understand them is to feel a kind of bluntness. They do not scheme in the way humans do. They react and amplify. In a strange inversion, there is also a kind of grotesque innocence in the Orks' approach. Their belief that anything bigger than them is worth taking for the joy of tearing it apart. Yet this honesty is violent, and their joy becomes terror for those who stand in their path. If space marines are carved stone and guardsmen are weathered cloth and tech priests are prayer mechanisms, then Orks are a raw, energetic force, a theology of melee. Their culture intoxicates. They proliferate like a fungus, consuming and reshaping their surroundings into a reflection of their noise. In the cities of Armageddon, Ork banners look childlike at first, scribbles of color and crude symbols, until they cover a building, and it begins to look like a living organism. In their wake, the planet becomes a carnival of broken things and smashed order. We cannot speak of Armageddon without the shadow that whispers and moves like oil. Chaos. Chaos is a corruption of meaning. It is the membrane between intention and dissolution, and its nature is both seductive and obscene. The gods of chaos do not always arrive as horned beasts. Sometimes they arrive as an itch at the back of a mind, as an image that lingers too long in the corner of a comrade's eye. They offer gifts, speed, strength, revelations, and accept in return the slow erosion of identity. Chaos works like a solvent. It dissolves edges. A man who loved his wife and remembered her name might now find that the syllables of her name become delicious and dangerous to speak. It tastes like power to the tongue, and with each repeating it becomes less a name and more a ritual. Chaos gives compulsions that feel like answers. What begins as comfort becomes a chain. The corruption is slow, often intimate. It moves through whispered promises, through symbols carved into knuckles in the night, through the indulgence of a small, private cruelty that grows like a wound into a brand. The forces of chaos are not monolithic. They present themselves differently to different minds. To a hungry soldier, it might offer a vision of victory. To a tech priest, it might whisper a secret method of synchronizing a machine with life itself. To a space marine, it might offer a memory of glory and a bone-deep certainty that the next sacrifice will be for the cause. The price is always identity. The reward is always more war. Now sense the intersection, where these natures meet and grind. Armageddon is a place where different logics are forced into proximity. If the space marines are a tempered blade and the tech priests are the whetstones, the guardsmen are the palms that deliver the strike. Orks bring an elemental force that tears fabric. Chaos is the acid that blurs lines. In this theater, collisions create sparks. Sparks can start conflagrations. Consider how each faction perceives the others. Space Marines regard the Guard with a patient, sometimes condescending acceptance. The Guard is useful, it is human, and thus necessary. The Tech Priest views the Space Marine with a mixture of reverence and envy. Such creatures are marvels of applied engineering, but their internal failures, the fragments of memory they retain, are a nuisance to the priest's tidy theologies. Orks are barely regarded beyond the immediate need to destroy, and chaos is a whisper that makes the teeth ache. The Guard, in turn, sees Space Marines as legends that appear in times of need and leave when the papers become too thick. The Tech Priest sees the Guard as crude and messy, but necessary for the machines to have souls to defend. And so each faction writes the others into its mythos, reducing them to function, to the role they must play. But under the layers of duty and friction, there is an anatomy of fear. Fear is the common language. A guardsman fears the day he will die and be forgotten. A space marine fears the slow dying of the self in the service of the larger cause. The tech priest fears the entropy of both machine and memory. The orc knows only the fear of not being loud enough. Chaos understands fear and metabolizes it into fuel. These fears animate choices, and choices become rituals, and rituals become the architecture of fate. Now, intimately, look at the internal struggle, the human heart under armor and oil. Lysander's private moments reveal fissures. He kneels in the glow of a ruined chapel and idly touches the inside of his gauntlet, feeling a tiny warmth where flesh once pressed. He recalls, in fragments, the sound of a child calling his name wrong. He keeps that fragment locked in a small box underneath his bunk. The memory hums there like a wounded thing. When he is with his brothers, the memory is a foreign scene. They joke about food and drink and medals. The memory resists the jokes. Sometimes, late at night, Lysander will dream not of battle tactics, but of being small and cold and held. He wakes startled, as if remembering a life he never had. In better moods, he will tell himself that these are not weaknesses, but evidence of what he has protected. Malkyr's wounds are mechanical and spiritual. He has replaced fingers with tool arms and his eyes with lenses, and in the empty spaces where skin once was, small wonders take root. Inscriptions carved into metal that he cannot fully read but insists upon cleaning. He sometimes hears the whir of a bearing that was never fitted in this age, and becomes obsessed with finding where it came from. When he pries open a servitor, he sometimes finds within the casing a tiny scrap of fabric, a child's ribbon, a relic from a previous life the machine somehow picked up. The tech priest's reaction is curious. Is it a contamination to be purged, or an artifact to be revered? The question dissolves him. He answers both ways. The guardsman's struggle is simpler only because it must be born larger. He misses his family. He is terrified and proud. He cannot reconcile the two. The needs of the many mean his personal losses are footnotes. Yet he keeps small things, a photograph tucked inside a boot, a promise to return. When he fails to keep that promise, there is a personal apocalypse, a private grief that eats at him with the persistence of rust. Chaos, however, offers another kind of internal struggle, temptation. A soldier finds himself suddenly invincible in a moment of desperation. Bullets part, a vision flares, glory tastes like sugar. The soldier is grateful to the thing that gave it. Later, the vision returns as an itch, a tiny, corrosive need. He scratches. The scratch opens. The thing slips in. No one admits the exchange in the morning. It is deniable and therefore more dangerous. Horror takes shape along these internal fractures. The body horror many of you imagine, grotesque fusion of flesh and metal, appears here not as immediate spectacle, but as the slow accretion of small compromises. A servo joint that heats for a second longer than it ought. A whisper in the mind that wasn't there yesterday. A servitor that pauses and regards its keeper with an angle of stillness. Each small disruption is a ratcheting gear that leads to larger breakdown. The skin of identity frays and, in time, tears. Texture is important. When a power armor joint fails, there is a smell. The bitter tang of burnt lubricants mixed with ozone and the faint metallic tang of singed hair. When a tech priest takes apart a machine, there is a music to it. The soft click of bearings, the sigh of springs. These sensory details anchor the horror in the body. They make the threat feel intimate, like a frost creeping up the calf. You will feel it because it is described with the sense of touch and taste. the way a fever is described by the memory of cold sheets. There is a social anatomy too, the way orders are passed, how rumors travel, and the rituals that keep the society coherent. On Armageddon, rumors are like fungus growing behind paneling, invisible until you try to peel the paint. A whispered myth about a space marine being possessed will become, over weeks, a cautionary tale told to huddled children to keep them from straying. The social function of story is to bind people together, but the stories here also become vector points for corruption. A rumor that a tech priest has found a way to make engines feed on flesh might be laughed at, and then transformed into something that troops pass around during watch. The joke hardens into doctrine, and doctrine may become the seed of a ritual. Power, political, religious, and mechanical, determines what becomes truth. Priests, commissars, captains. Each wields authority, and each enforces an order that in a different world might crumble. On Armageddon, orders are oxygen. Without them, people become prey. Thus the factions police truth. The Space Marines guard mythic narrative. The Tech Priest guards the canon of function. The Guard preserves the story of sacrifice. Orks create a myth that is loud and immediate. Chaos undermines all narrative slowly until the idea of narrative itself is suspect. Now let us return to that soft, hypnotic cadence while nudging it toward a sharper edge. We have seen the natures, the stoic geometry of Space Marines, the human raggedness of the Guard, the sacred mechanical clarity of Tech Priests, the brutal exuberance of Orks, and the slow solubility of chaos. We have felt their bodies and glimpsed their inner crevices. We hear the machinery of conflict warming like a kettle. The final thing to sit with is the way these natures are not fixed. They are porous. Armageddon tempers them into something new. Steel softens at heat, bone fractures under force, belief mutates under pressure. A space marine can find himself singing a lullaby without meaning to. A guardsman can become a zealot. A tech priest can grow curious enough to touch an icon carved in living skin. The porousness is where horror grows. Corruption does not shout, it slides. The human asks, what if? And that question is all the opening an intruder needs. Picture a slow scene. Lysander limps from battle, a joint sticking with a squeak the likes of which he has never heard. He ignores it as a rule, but the squeak persists. In the noise he hears not a fault but a phrase. The phrase is not in a language but in a rhythm he recognizes from an old hymn. In the rhythm there is an invitation. He files the thought away. The filing is a ritual of denial, but denial is not a lock, it is a veneer. Malkyr, back in the forge, studies a generator with intent so concentrated it is like prayer. He traces a hairline filament, and his lens blurs for a beat. When he wipes his eye he sees, reflected in the oil-slick surface, a face that is neither wholly man nor wholly machine. He laughs once, a brittle sound, and then catalogs the laughter in his logbook as an anomaly. Later at night, that anomaly will bloom into the understanding that machines do not merely obey, sometimes they remember. And the guardsman, he is hungry and tired. He dreams of returning home. A stranger in the trench tells him of a device that can make food multiply. The guardsman believes. He believes because belief is warm and immediate. Later, when asked to do something cruel in the name of that device, he complies easily. It is not that he is evil. It is that the need for sustenance is heavier than the polygons of morality we draw in fresher times. Chaos watches these movements like a tide charts gulls. It picks the bright feathers and waits. It waits because its victories are not made in thunderclaps, but in the evaporation of trust. As this section draws slowly toward its close, allow yourself to feel a tightening. Not yet panic, not yet sprinting heart. The tightening is like a hinge that has been oiled for too long and now will not resist. We leave these natures in their rooms, still warm from labor and prayer, and we let the first hints of modification appear on the fabric. A missing patch of cloth, a new tally mark on a wrist, a line of red ink across a forehead. These small marks are not dramatic on their own. They will mean everything later. There is one last image before the chapter ends, a long, gentle tracking inward, like a camera closing on a single point. The camera passes a ruined cathedral where a tech priest whispers into a generator. It glides over the shoulder of a guardsman who folds a letter he will never send. It rests at the hand of a space marine who caresses the inside of his helm, and in the paint scratch there, discovers an extra stroke that was not there before, an emblem he does not recognize, a curving mark that tastes like the edge of a memory not yet formed. We will leave you there at that small emblem. It is a quiet thing, easy to ignore, yet everything that follows will be threaded through that tiny scratch. The nature of factions and characters on Armageddon is not the nature of single giants. It is the sum of many small compromises. It is the way ritual becomes habit, and habit becomes superstition, and superstition festers into cult. Rest now, but keep the awareness like a found coin in your pocket. It is small and will not weigh much in the dark. Yet if you rub it between finger and thumb, you will feel its edges. And in those edges the story continues, silent and patient, until some other night when the storm will no longer be a rumor, and the planet will no longer be able to pretend the scratches on its skin are only wounds from old weather. Listen again, as if you were waking from a dream you have been having for a long time. Breathe slow. Let each breath be a measured oarstroke pulling you deeper into a night that is not quite dark yet. We have walked the ruined parapets, met the bodies of belief and machine, and learned the names of the three who hold this planet's thin hope: Lysander, Malkyr, and Jessa. Now we will move into the hours where small things begin to fray, and the first true discomfort slides across the skin like a cool, wet cloth. Keep in mind the cadence. Calm, then subtle. Small noises grow teeth. The scene opens on a morning that is almost ordinary. Rain has been falling for days in consistent, patient sheets. The air tastes metallic, not only the tang of blood and rust, but the high taste of charged storms. Armageddon breathes in slow gusts. In the streets, people go about their tasks with ritualized languor. Meals are cooked over improvised heaters, orders are issued in clipped, practiced tones, and the forges cough in a rhythm that could be mistaken for a lullaby. Begin with the soundscape. You hear the distant moan of an aerolift pitching against the cloud banks. Under that is the soft scuff of boots on wet stone. Sometimes, if you listen carefully, you'll hear something beneath everything else. An undertone that is more felt than heard, like a conductor's hum in a violin. It's the vibration of machines old enough to remember when men sang differently. At first it means nothing. That's what makes it dangerous. Lysander wakes as he always does. Slow, deliberate, like a soldier tuning a metronome. The inside of his helmet smells of ozone and incense. There's a bare undertow of sweat and the tang of metal where the seals meet his jaw. He runs gloved fingers over the gouge on his forearm. A shallow scar that maps in his memory a boy he could not save. The scar is a map he reads when he must feel anything resembling tenderness. He does not know yet that tenderness will be used against him. For now, the morning rides on habitual motions. He inspects his bolter, checks the latches of his greaves, watches a squad of guardsmen below laugh at a joke that will be eaten by mud later. Malkyr's Forge is a theater of small lights. Lamps hung like tired moons illuminate coils and pistons. Servitors move in slow, homing arcs, their single mechanical eye reflecting the furnace glow. Malkyr's fingers, more bronze prosthesis than bone, stroke a bearing and whisper the calibration hymn under his breath. He knows the names of these parts like a liturgist knows saints. He hums to them. The machines hum back. It is a conversation of low fidelity, and it comforts him as prayer did when skin was thicker on his hands. Jessa moves through the alleys, a small shadow with pockets full of scavenged comforts. She has a habit of stopping to listen to the broken pipes. She says the pipes tell her stories if you let them sing long enough. It is a superstition that keeps her grounded. She tucks a seed pod into the hem of her coat and feels the cloth against her palm like a promise. In her mind, small things are resistances to coming oblivion. They are simple and human, and therefore precious. The early hours fold into a cleft of ordinary actions, and the world seems safely contained. Then the first oddity surfaces like a bubble on a still pond. A servitor in a maintenance bay pauses mid-rotation. The arm that should loop and return freezes as if listening to an inner voice. The lights of its ocular flicker, not the steady beat of a functional unit, but something halting, shy. A junior tech priest notices and taps the casing with a diagnostic probe. The servitor resumes. The tech priest shrugs in the way people do when a clock ticks wrong in the night. Old gear, he says. The phrase is a stone that will not sink. Small anomalies cluster like flies around a lamp. A Vox broadcast slips. A sudden, brief overlay over the morning orders of voice, not belonging. It is a whisper so quick that most miss it, but a mother pausing in a doorway hears it and tells her child to move closer, hand tightening on the little one's sleeve. The whisper is a half phrase, half breath, and it tastes of ozone and something older, like the flavor of a bone. The words are indistinct, but the intonation is oddly intimate, as if the voice were reciting a private name. That same morning, a guardsman returns to his billet with a mud-caked scrap of paper he found near the ruined cathedral. On it is a single curving stroke, not a letter he knows, but a mark that makes the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He tucks it into the seam of his tunic, and that night he dreams of hands he does not recognize pressing against his chest. In the dream, he can feel the bones move beneath the skin. He wakes before dawn, heart a drum in his throat, and the mark in his tunic feels like a burning coal. You begin to notice patterns because horror is patient and prefers accumulation to spectacle. A bearing squeaks a syllable. A servitor pauses at the sight of a mural and tilts its head. A young scout rambles home muttering the shape of a symbol. Individually, each event is trivial. Together, like threads crossing in a loom, they form a pattern that, when observed from far enough away, reads as intention. We pull inward now to the private chambers of the characters we know. These rooms are small islands of ritual. Lysander polishes his armor with a surgical patience that borders on tenderness. He traces the painted chapter mark on his pauldrons and notices, for the first time, an extra brushstroke at the edge, a little curl added by no hand he recognizes. He frowns and then, with disciplined reluctance, discards the thought as smear from a hurried repaint. Later that day, he sees the same curl etched into the neck of a tattered banner in the market. The world seems to have begun to copy a notation he does not own. That is the first, faint echo of mimicry. Malkyr discovers similarly subtle deviations. He lifts the casing on an old generator to replace a worn stator and finds, within the insulation, a small circle of red resin. It is not part of the original assembly. It is a deliberate addition, carved and filled with a compound that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. The tech priest is curious, and curiosity is dangerous. He files the specimen and annotates it under the header, Anomaly. He places the fragment in a secure display near his workbench, and during the hours when engineered things are quiet, will sometimes find his eyes drawn to the way it drinks the glow from his lamp. Jessa, in a narrow courtyard, plants a seed in forgotten soil and, while she pats the earth, feels the ground shiver beneath her fingers, like a sleeping beast changing position. It is a small tremor, barely worth mentioning. She stands and looks to the skyline where factory chimneys puncture the cloud. For a moment, she thinks she sees the silhouette of a figure scaling the skyline, a dark shape that dissolves into steam. She tells herself it is a trick of rain. Later that week, she will keep seeing that silhouette at the edge of her vision, always at the tail of mist. The thought wraps around her like a damp shawl. These little events disturb the perimeter, but the heart of early horror is less in events than in their invasion of intimacy. The world that was relied upon for solidity now offers anomalies in the place where comfort is most expected. Within memory, within ritual, within the toolkit of routine. This is how dread seeds itself, not as an explosion but as a rearrangement of the furniture in a room you think you know. The first human casualty of such rearrangement will be confidence. Confidence is eroded by repetition. A serviceman says, "old gear," and then "old gear" is said again in another billet, and then the same phrase is repeated somewhere a kilometer away. The repetition gives the phrase the force of a superstition. We learn superstition the way we learn to walk, by copying. That evening, in a dimly lit mess hall, someone leans over and mentions a scrap of rumor, that a child was found in the slag fields humming a tune backwards. Someone else laughs nervously. The laugh echoes and settles. The rumor breeds its own ecosystem. Begin to notice the embodiment of that rumor in the more physical signs. A herd of feral dogs that once used to avoid the forges now pads through them, unafraid of the heat. Their eyes have a reflective, almost phosphorescent sheen. They cluster at the edges of settlements at dusk and make a low, waiting sound like someone clearing their throat. No one understands why. People put salt out and tell scrawny kids not to go near the packs. Later still, a child goes missing for the night and returns without telling where they went. The child's eyes are slightly wider, and they keep humming the same pattern the rumor described. Horror likes mirrors. It uses them to double an image until the original becomes uncertain. In a week of subtle changes, the planet's reflections begin to misalign. Vox transmissions carry echoes, voices twice removed, timbres that do not belong to the speaker's mouth. Sergeant Harlan, a guardsman with a laugh like a saw, calls through the network for ammunition. For a moment, the channel repeats the call back as if someone else is answering from within the call, and there is a soft intake of breath not his. Harlan stares at the open comms and feels absurdly, nakedly watched. The sensation gnaws. He chalks it up to overload, but in the quiet of his bunk, he presses his fingers to his temple and hears a rhythm beneath the pulse, a rhythm like someone practicing a heartbeat. These sensations are the early arcs of internal corruption. The character's private space, once a refuge, becomes a place where rules bleed. Lysander notices that his dreams, previously regimented with drills and commands, now include slivers of other things. Faces made of smoke, hymns that end in a sudden, soft laughter. He wakes at first only slightly unsettled, but over days the slivers lengthen into scenes that linger like a scent. The longer a dream lingers into waking, the more likely it is to be believed. Malkyr is tempted by the generator's red resin. He runs diagnostics that return perfectly nominal readings, but the data slate records a pattern that interpolates no known signal. He uses instruments to sample, and then becomes mentally engaged beyond his rational intent. He sits with the fragment as long as watch schedules allow, and the fragment fits its own light into the corners of his lab like an eye. The tech priest begins cataloging not mechanical faults, but patterns in the patterns, an obsession that will soon displace his other cares. Jessa notices tiny things in the soil where she plants, seeds that sprout overnight into leaves that have odd, asymmetrical veins. She keeps them in a small pot by her window and watches as the new growth leans, as if listening. One night she finds nibbled leaves on the pot, though no animal could reach them. The plant seems to grow towards something she cannot yet see and retract from things she cannot name. One morning she wakes and the seed pod in her pocket has been replaced with a small circle of resin, black and smooth. She remembers keeping the seed. She is certain she did. She is also certain the seed is gone. Objects, too, begin to misbehave. A relic in the cathedral, a small, crudely wrought icon of a winged skull, is found with a fresh mark on its cheek, like a score of red ink. No one in the chapel remembers making it. The priests argue quietly in the vestry and chalk it up to vandalism. Yet, when they lock the doors and count the flannel and pews, they each feel a tiny prickle in the back of the neck. The icon will later appear in the pocket of a guard, who was not seen in the cathedral that day. Small, unremarkable things will act like keys. A missing bolt on a power jack reveals a hollow seam that contains a scrap of cloth the color of deep mold. A child's toy, a tin soldier, found in the slag alongside scorch marks in no known cartridge pattern. A painting of a saint with a slight aperture where a button is meant, and inside the aperture is a chip of resin again. The materials recur. The recurrence is the first map of intent. Notice, too, the social contagion that follows. Rumors solidify into practices. Soldiers avoid certain alleys on certain nights. Merchants shut shutters earlier than they did last month. Mothers hum different lullabies, changing words to keep misapplied notes away. The changes feel protective. But every ritual invented to protect is also a protocol that normalizes the abnormal. The guard who refuses to walk a route because of a pattern seen in a dream is then lauded as cautious. Caution becomes doctrine. Doctrine is the place where corruption can be codified. There are bodies, too. They crop up in places people have depended upon as safe. A scavenger found in a maintenance shaft, no visible wounds, only an expression of shock and a faint red ring half embedded around one wrist. A servitor left in a public square that whirs madly through a salute and then, quietly, unplugs itself, leaving its circuitry smoking. An animal that refuses to approach any house with a certain sigil painted at the doorway. These are not the gore of horror, but its clinical markers, the organism that has been tested and found to respond differently. Sound becomes interrogation. In the dead hour before dawn, there is a new noise. A pattern of taps across the hulls outside the medbay, a syncopated tempo that does not match any known code. People listen and invent meanings. It must be a mechanical fault. It must be someone walking with a limp. Perhaps it is raindrops. The speculation is a containment ritual. When the taps spread along more hulls, the impossible becomes probable. Isolation is the subtle work of early horror. Individuals begin to censor themselves in ways that make them unreadable to others. The space between two people increases incrementally until it becomes a gulf that conversation cannot cross. Lysander finds himself walking a little farther from his squad during patrols, ostensibly to scout the perimeter. In truth, he is testing how distance alters the noise he hears behind the breath of the world. He likes the way the horizon bends when his step is alone. Malkyr accepts a solitary watch in the forge and uses an extra servitor to mimic human presence, so he will not have to quarrel with the ache of being a man and machine alone. Jessa takes to leaving small offerings on thresholds, folded notes, seeds, a bit of bread, because she feels that things are listening better if they are spoken to. The horror's morality is subtle. It does not demand violence at once. It asks for attention. It asks to be noticed. That is its power. Attention is permission, and in small parts permission becomes ownership. A guardsman notices a pattern and repeats it once. He may not think anything of it. The pattern becomes a motif. The motif becomes a litany. The litany, now practiced, is a portal, and so the atmosphere thickens. Storms gather with a frequency that seems unnaturally synchronized to certain events. When a veteran dies in the field, a chunk of skyline opens up like a mouth, and the rain falls harder. Buildings begin to whisper in ways that sound like language if you tilt your ear to the bricks. Shadows collect differently. They linger at the edges of alleys long after the light has left. People stop saying the word safe. They begin to say hold. By the end of these early tides, a structural shift has taken place. The world is no longer simply a stage. It has become an actor. It plays with the people upon it. It mirrors gestures and responds to grief with a kind of echo that looks like sympathy. It teaches patterns to a mind that wants to feel in control, and the mind will adopt them because anything that suggests control is comfort. We leave this phase at the edge of an audible change in the world's voice. The hum that used to be a barely perceptible undertone has grown into a whisper that occasionally uses words. These words are not yet full speech. They do not command. They do not promise. They float like tastes in the mouth of the mind and then vanish. You may think them nothing. That is exactly what the whisper counts on. The final image before the tide heightens is a simple, domestic scene rendered uncanny by cumulative detail. A family sitting to a small supper. The tablecloth is patched. A child plays with a carved wooden figure that has a single, careful swirl painted on its chest, the same curl Lysander noticed on his banner. The father laughs, but there is a tautness around his eyes, and his hand reaches out to brush that swirl as if to check whether it is real. Outside, the rain beats in a steady pattern. Somewhere in the distance, a servitor sings a coaxing note that is almost, but not quite, a hymn. You, who have been breathing slow and staying with the hush, will feel the atmosphere pressing a little more insistently now. You will notice how your skin reacts to a sound you could not name 5 minutes ago. That is the point. That is exactly the point. Soon, the patterns will not be small things. They will have teeth. For now, they are invitations with polite edges. They stand in the doorway and smile in a way that suggests familiarity. The characters of this planet, Lysander who catalogs, Malkyr who annotates, Jessa who plants, will all choose in their small ways to answer those phantom smiles. Each answer will be a compromise that seems reasonable at the time. This is the early build-up. It is the slow knitting together of a tapestry that will, later, hang with razor wire. It is the period where the world learns how to speak and the people learn how to reply. The horror is not yet roaring. It is learning to phrase the questions so gently you will think you thought of them first. Hold this moment. Keep breathing slow. Keep the lullaby's cadence in your chest. We will move next to the parts where the mechanical hum becomes a chorus, and the chorus begins to sing your name. For now, let the rain's percussion and the quiet, persistent scratches of things become a small metronome in the hollow of your ear. The pattern is starting to fit. The night is attentive, and it is patient. Listen, breathe slow once again, and then let the breath shorten a fraction. Keep the calm you have practiced like a talisman. You will need it, because what follows is the day when small things stop apologizing for being strange and begin to demand answer. We have watched the world rearrange itself, felt the whispering pattern fold into routine. We have seen small anomalies collect like dust. Now, in the long, loud hour before breaking, the world tightens its hands. The cadence changes. Where once your heart kept the beat, now the planet borrows it and speeds the tempo by a few careful ticks. That change is all it takes. Morning arrives like an accusation. The rain that once pattered steady now falls in a staccato, as if someone had trained drums on the sky. The air tastes thicker. Not only the metallic tang of engines and the old, bitter breath of burned oil, but now something sweet beneath it, like the scent of fruit that has been left too long and begun its slow rot. A smell that promises nourishment and leaves rot on the tongue. It is uncanny in its pleasantness. Lysander feels the shift in his bones before his mind names it. He wakes with a pressure at the base of his skull, as if some unseen hand presses a thumb against the hinge of his mind. The inside of his helmet, the place of ritual, of the familiar push and fit of seals, is suddenly too narrow. He lingers too long inspecting the crease where the polymer meets the metal and notices, as if for the first time, that the seam has a hairline groove carved into it that was not there when he last set it down. The groove loops like a smile. He traces it with a gauntlet fingertip and the metal is warm. The warmth is wrong. Metal should be cool. His servos register microactivity and lace through the skin of his hand like a message. The message is only noise. He thinks it is nothing. You will hear him think it is nothing. Malkyr's forge is strangely talkative that morning. Servitors that have been obedient for decades shiver and flicker with a more complicated pattern than maintenance cycles should produce. They pause to peer at faces with oculars that seem, for a breath, to take a measure of the soul. A coil hums with a frequency that resonates through normative prayer. Malkyr's lens picks up harmonics that read as interference. He brings his palm to the casing, and the generator answers like a living throat. There is a low vibration, like syllables in a language he has no catalog for. He leans in and hears, in the vibration, a cadence that begins like a clock and then falls away into something like a croon. It is almost melodic. His practiced mind thinks of fault trees and recalibration. His other mind, the small, private corner that keeps a list of his father's real name, receives the pulse as if it were a hand pressing the outline of a prayer into his bones. Jessa notices the plants differently. The seedlings she has tended are not only growing fast, they are rearranging themselves. Leaves twist into patterns that seem intentional enough that Jessa pauses when she sees them, as if the plants had formed glyphs with their veins. When she comes back at noon, her small pot has split open and displays a thin ribbon of black resin embedded in the soil, like a small painted bone. The pot of soil feels older. It is drier and yet smells of a damp place she has never seen. She reaches down with a scavenger's careful fingers and touches the resin. It gives, not like brittle glass but like skin. When she draws her hand back, her fingers are clean, inexplicably clean, as if the thing has scrubbed itself of evidence. The seed she planted is gone. You can feel the world learning the names for things that were previously unnamed. It practices them softly, like a shy child repeating a piece of catechism. The practice is not harmless. Language makes expectation, and expectation makes behavior. The first unmistakable public failure occurs in the market district. A vendor's stand, a simple array of canned rations and boot polish, nothing remarkable, is suddenly surrounded by a ring of scavenging animals. They stand as sentries, heads still, eyes reflecting light like coins. A child approaches to take a stray loaf. The animals do not move. The child laughs, the laugh bouncing into the air and breaking like a piece of thin glass. It falls on the animals and does something. Their eyes change color. Whatever first gleamed like coins now looks like molten mercury. The animals tilt their heads, and a sound leaves the market that is not entirely animal and not entirely mechanical. A metallic titter that smells like old paper and burned meat. The father scoops the child back as the animals recoil as one and slink away, not in fear but in obedience. No one knows why. That obedience is the first sign of the contagion turning outward. Not only the psyche, not only the dreams, but the ecosystem answering. The planet does not only whisper into minds, it begins to rewrite behaviors in its creatures. The line between organism and environment blurs. Architecture breathes. The city participates. From then, the rhythm accelerates. Communications begin to fail in deliberate patterns. Vox channels that once transmitted battle orders now carry a secondary message layered under the static. A slow intonation, a chant at a pitch below the normal hearing range, like a cattle call that only certain ears can parse. It is not always a chant. Sometimes it's a pattern of breaths. Soldiers who listen through a headset hear the pattern and later find their palms marked with a faint, curving scar that matches the praise mark on a banner, and no one can explain. Lysander's squad suffers the first real, visible breach. They are on a patrol, boots echoing on the ruined marble of a civic plaza, when the air around them grows a shade colder, and the light seems to smear. One of the young sergeants, a man with a laugh that used to mean everything in a trench, stops and lifts a hand as if answering a call. The gesture is small. It could be a reflex. He is smiling. His smile is not his. His pupils dilate beyond the normal range. He steps out of formation and walks to a mural where an old mural of saints and war heroes has peeled over the years. He stands looking at it and then lifts his hand to touch the wall. The squad shouts order, tries to pull the man away. Mechanical locks clack as Lysander reaches for his bolter. The sergeant's hand presses to the mural and the mural responds. From the peeling fresco, a thin ribbon of red resin slides free like a tongue. It wraps around the sergeant's wrist, harmlessly at first, sticky and faint. The sergeant laughs, a sound that is no longer his voice, and then with feline quickness jerks his arm. He drops, and the resin retracts like a living thing, and the man is left trembling, eyes wide, whispering words in a cadence that is older than the language they speak. They carry him back to base, and at the infirmary they find a mark on his palm like a lock of inked script. He cannot remember why he smiled. He cannot remember the hymn he had been singing. He only knows that the tune feels like a wound. Observation becomes suspicion. Friends glance at friends and find small, impossible things. A fleck of resin beneath a fingernail. A line of pattern on the inside of a boot that wasn't there the night before. An extra notch on a service weapon that no one can account for. The communal trust that holds makes itself thin like used canvas. Conversations become lists. People begin to inventory. The act of counting becomes a way of warding off the unknown. But counting rituals are themselves patterns the world begins to mimic. Noise becomes instruction. Those who hear the new pattern for longer begin to move in accordance with it. It is not mind control in the blunt way of a telepathic whip. It is a reweaving of the mind's small rituals. When you hear a song enough, you hum it. When you hum, you join the chorus. It is a mimetic tide. The more the pattern moves through people, the more rigid it becomes. It becomes a grammar for action. Malkyr finds himself cataloging the wrong things. He once wrote only lists of torque tolerances and pressure thresholds. Now his logbook bulges with odd entries. Resin sample, responsive to humidity, exhibits low-frequency resonance with whispered catechism. He writes and then closes the book and fingers a page as if expecting it to speak. His servitors, once mildly mechanical, begin to rearrange tools on his bench in arrangements that mirror the glyphs carved into the mural by the sergeant. A gaggle of servitors place a ring of spanners around the resin like a ceremonial wreath. Malkyr does not immediately interpret it as sacrilege. He is a scientist and a believer. The mind that worships mechanism is the mind that will, in small, careful steps, rationalize sacrilege. Jessa becomes a repository of odd gifts. Strangers, ragged types who used to trade purely for staples, bring offerings. A coin that is half melted with an eyeball embossed into the metal. A child's wooden toy with a new swirl carved not by human hand. A scrap of uniform with a sigil smeared. At first she barters them away or hides them under her bed. Then she stops. She begins to place the objects on thresholds and to stitch them into a small patchwork hung over her door. Each piece smells different. Sulfur, grease, the soft odor of old paper. At night she dreams the objects whisper names. In waking, she hums the names without will. The hums become tiny petitions that press against the city's skin. The Ork presence, which had been a rattling drumstick on the planet's periphery, becomes an accelerant. Their warbands convulse toward the planet with a force that seems to be drawn to the infection, as if something in their crude minds tastes like battle waiting for them. Orks are opportunists. They smell the scent of fresh violence and are drawn. In the fields outside the city, their banners are not just painted crude glyphs now. The glyphs shimmer with a strange tackiness, as if resin beads have been added to the fabric, giving each crude face a wet, glossy eye. The Orks throng like a contagion of their own, and when they meet the new behaviors of the planet, the result is a feedback loop. Orks shout and paint. The planet echoes the chant. The chant attracts more Orks. Violence grows exponential. Yet the strangest aspect is how the very tools of war begin to fail in ways that mirror inner fissures. Power packs surge with a softness, feeding a gentle overcurrent that warms the skin rather than burning through it. Weapons do not explode, but they misfire in precise fashions that seem calculated to maim rather than kill, to leave a body alive but fractured, a living hinge. Soldiers who are struck by these misfires return to lines with stuttering speech patterns, and a small, repeating syllable curling at the edge of everything they say. The syllable resembles, in its inflection, a broken part of an old hymn. The wounded keep it, the syllable, like a pebble in the throat. Tension accretes in a visible geometry. Barricades are erected faster, but the barricades adopt patterns. Where wood and metal are lashed together, someone or something carves spirals and repeated arcs into the binders overnight. They are not simply markings. They are precise and measured. The men who wake to see them stand uncertain, their hands seeking the safety of a rifle before they realize their fingers are not steady. These marks look like writing and are not writing. They look like prayer and are not prayer. They are artifacts of a grammar that the world is learning. When a unit of Tempestus scions, elite troopers, assault a derelict manufactorum to clear a suspected nest. They find the floor littered not with blood, but with carefully arranged mosaics made of shattered ceramic, bone, and metal. The mosaics render faces turned upward, mouths open in a frozen laugh. The scions are trained to clear and mark terrain. Their training does not prepare them for the sensation that the faces are listening. One of them, a veteran named Holt, kneels and passes a gloved finger over a mouth in the mosaic. His knuckle meets something smooth and warm. He recoils as if burned. Later, he will say there was a whisper at that moment that sounded like his own name, but backwards. Backwards names stick like burrs. Collective dreams begin. It is not that everyone sleeps simultaneously, although sleep is more frequent as exhaustion and contagion conspire. People who have never shared a bed see the same images. A cathedral that hangs from the sky by a web of wires. A child with eyes like oil. A machine that eats sunlight as teeth. These shared dreams do not arrive as narratives but as sensations, like having tasted a single new spice, and then discovering it on every tongue worldwide. The shared dream builds a rumor factory, and rumors combust into actions. Among the most delicate terrors is the way memories begin to misalign. Old postcards look different in the morning. Names on a death list that had been stable for months swap like misprinted ledger entries. People discover that they recall events in the wrong order. They remember having fought in a place that did not exist. Family photographs pick up tiny differences. A mother's hand has an extra finger in an old print. A child's toy has a swirl in its paint now. Evidence corrodes trust. People question themselves first and each other later. Confession, once a human outlet, becomes risky. The act of speaking aloud a recollection makes it pliable to suggestion. In one particularly brutal vignette, a platoon returns from a foray outside the city against an Ork band, only to be met with a wreckage of their own supply train, where the crates are opened, and their contents rearranged into anatomical patterns. Canned meat is stacked like vertebrae. Ration bars are lined to form eyes, dozens of them. The men stare and then, almost without planning, begin to copy the act, arranging small items into mimicries and placing them around the camp. The pattern spreads like a game children invent at the edge of a grave. By the next dawn, someone has set up a crude altar and begun to burn what little paper remains. The smoke smells wrong, sweet and thick. Those who most resist are not immune. An officer who once mocked superstition finds himself waking at night to write the same sequence of numbers across whatever paper is at hand. 7417. He doesn't know why. He tells himself it is a mnemonic for supply lines. Later, when pressed, he cannot explain why the numbers hold him like a chord. He dreams the numbers in rhythm as if one is a drum beat, and the next is the echo of a footstep, and the last is the sound of a phrase. He cannot break the habit. As the crescendo builds, the tempo becomes a physical thing. It is audible and then palpable. The ground at certain points hums with a chord that matches the resonance in the resin fragments, a three-note progression low enough to vibrate teeth. Dogs will not cross such places. They whine near them and then sit and fix their gaze. Soldiers with implants find that the implants pick up interference and misreport coordinates, leading patrols into loops that return them to the same abandoned square in which they first heard the three notes. Time becomes cyclical in small pockets. Men loop through the same hour twice, and each repetition sees a small alteration, a missing chord, a new mark on a wall. The social order shudders. Commissars issue decrees, but the language of those decrees becomes taut, urgent, and their ink sometimes smudges to form the same curve seen elsewhere. People read and then feel as if they've been read themselves. Orders focus more on conformity than on strategy. The need to match, to not be anomalous, becomes itself a structure to obey. It is a parasite on necessity. And amid all this, chaos stirs with a patience that is not human. It does not bulldoze. It collects. It offers. Its gifts are small and immediate and always come with a wordless price. A trooper with a broken knee is given a prosthetic that works like a miracle, made from resinous bone that seems to knit with real flesh. He leaps and runs and weeps with joy. He wakes later to find that his laugh is a little too bright and that he thinks in syllables that are not his. He begins to carve spirals into his armor. The spiral is small, then more spiral. The gift has a voice, and the voice sings his name when he sleeps. Do not miss the way the planet seems to conspire with these offers. The land itself becomes a co-conspirator. Where chaos touches, growth accelerates or decays in unnerving ways. Fields where orc banners plant take on a shimmer like dew and then begin to sprout black shoots that hum. The shoots are not plant as you know it. They sing with vibration. They hook themselves to metal and draw at the edges, making little pain sounds that are more wood than pain. They are slow feeders, and they want the heat the machines produce. Machines, in turn, begin to hum to the plants, and Malkyr writes in his log, "Possible symbiosis observed." It is at this edge that things stop being polite. The city finally pushes back in crude honesty. The forges, long the domain of controlled combustion, flame higher in odd patches, spitting cinders that fan into shapes the eye insists are faces. The cathedral bell that had tolled 13 times once as an oddity begins to toll on its own, a slow, patient knell that keeps no schedule. People conditioned by years of ritual answer by dropping to a knee. They do not know why. The answer doesn't matter. The action matters. By then the cadence has replaced your breathing. You may notice it in yourself. Your pulse matches the three-note progression unconsciously. You speak and the sound in your mouth tastes like resin. The world has borrowed from you and you from it. You are becoming an instrument. That is the final turn. We arrive now at the place the world has been building toward. The hour where the silence breaks not into a sound but into many sounds, each one essential and terrible. Hold your breath as if cupping a fragile flame. The tempo will quicken. The narration will sharpen. This is the moment of unmasking, where the planet ceases to hint and becomes a consummate, deliberate thing. Dawn this day is not the soft gray we once mistook for weather. The sky has a sharpened quality, like paper held to a lamp. Light falls flat and accusatory, removing camouflage, clarifying edges. People step into the street and flinch at the naked geometry of ruin. The bell in the cathedral does not merely toll now, it tolls with a rhythm that has become a language. Each strike is a syllable. Those who have been listening all these days know, in the marrow, what the sequence asks. Those who have not will learn by consequence. It begins in the low quarter, where salvage gangs pick through the carcasses of tanks and carriers, and where children play a dangerous game of hide-and-seek beneath collapsed gantries. A cargo hold ruptures somewhere deeper in the city, and a sweet, clotted scent climbs out like steam from a stew pot left on too high a flame. The smell is impossible, rich and rotten in the same breath, and those who inhale it find memory altered by the taste. An old man who once loved his wife with a blunt, steady hunger remembers with shocking clarity a different hand on his face. Long, cold fingers like polished bone. He begins to sing a lullaby from that remembered mouth, and soon others join, because the lullaby fits like a missing tile. From the edge of the city, the orcs arrive in waves less crude than a simple crash, and more like the opening of a great mouth. A ritualistic entrance that seems to please the world itself. Their banners hang new beads of resin, glistening like wounds. They beat crude drums and shout, and their voices cross with the city's humming so that the combined sound becomes a chord, a call and response that makes hair rise along the back of a neck. The orcs are intoxicated by the resonance as much as by the promise of battle. They do not notice that some among them hesitate, touched by the same slow change that has taught stones to speak. An orc boy, small and bright-eyed, presses a sticky finger to his lip and laughs at something no one else hears. He is answering a voice only half their tribe recognizes. Far above, orbitals cut shadows that fall and move like the hands of watchers. Fleet tendrils close. Carriers disgorge troops that will never understand the dialect the planet has learned. They land and march under banners of the Imperium. Lysander and his company are among them, steel and ritual intent. He hears the bell in the cathedral and finds, with an old, buried impatience, that the rhythm settles inside his armor like a metronome that belonged to someone else. His squad moves as trained step, sight, breath, but there is a hitch in the cadence. Private things in their heads, a remembered laugh, a face, a scent flutter like trapped birds. Malkyr waits at the forge with a congregation of his own. Servitors' tools, the old machines that are like bones to him. He has spent days cataloging the resin fragments, the recurrent curves, the way eyes in paintings change on a whim. He is not a prophet. He is a man who believes in things that obey logic. Logic is the lens he polishes until legend and fact blur. Today his tools hum with a timbre that is not diagnostic. Servitors pause between tasks and hold their heads at new angles, like supplicants. Malkyr has fitted a resonant plate derived from the resin into the main generator. He will flip the power. He does not know whether he intends to test, to answer, or to bargain. Jessa moves through the alleys with a small staff and a pocket full of seed, less for planting than for a ritual she cannot yet name. People give her offerings, a sliver of ribbon that smells of smoke, a nail with strange curling grooves, a child's singing toy that ticks not like wind-up but like a pulse. She strings these into a talisman and ties it at her throat, an attempt at anchoring. The thing fights the tie with a cold curiosity. When she presses her palm to the soil in an old courtyard, the ground breathes against her skin. She hears the three-note chord that has become a hallmark of the planet, low and resonant as a throat clearing. She hums it back because all people answer to the sound that resembles their names. The hum is an offering. The ground replies. The first overt violence is precise, almost clinical and therefore more disorienting. An orc warband crashes through a barricade expecting chaos of the usual sort. Explosions, spray of metal, the honest mathematics of blood. Instead, as they topple sending splinters of wood and rust, their boots sink into a newly soft, yielding soil that clings like wet cloth. The ground holds them for a beat, and then releases with a slurping sound that could be laughter or a throat. The orcs laugh too, at first, and then their laughter tilts toward puzzlement when one of their champions reaches to pull free his axe and finds his hands resist, as if the weapon were adhered to his palms by a silky, living film. Other orcs find their banners heavy with dried veins of resin that match the new shapes appearing everywhere. The orc's instinct is to hack, but hacks meet an elasticity that is not metal and not flesh, and which seems to pull sound into its fiber before letting it go like a bell. Soldiers under Lysander's command report a new class of wound. Not clean, not explosive, but adhesive. Flesh where it had been whole is found nicked and grafted with foreign material, and those who are wounded feel the grafted areas vibrate faintly with the planet's call. One man, a corporal named Rook, is hit by splinter that embeds in his forearm and draws crimson in an orderly line, like a stitched seam. He is carried to the field medic and left writhing while the medici clamp the wound. When they cut away the foreign filaments, they find small beads embedded along their length, each bead containing a minute glimmer that refracts light like a captive star. Rook's eyes are glassy. He describes, between ragged breaths, a dream of teeth speaking to him in syllables that tasted like milk and iron. From the scaffolds of the ruined manufactorums, the machines begin to sing louder. Engines that once only purred now answer the bell with harmonics that build on one another in an unnatural architecture. The miners and tech priests trying to silence these anomalies discover to their horror that the machines have reorganized. Gears that had been cast apart are reunited in impossible planes, forming shapes that seem to be eyes, mouths, and the spines of creatures that could not be born of such metal. When servitors attempt to salvage parts, they find those parts have formed new connections without workmanship. Bolts threaded into places they were never meant to thread, conduits that loop to listen rather than to feed power. The machines have begun to improvise. Malkyr watches the improvisation like a parent watches a child stitch wings to its shoulders. He is frightened not by the machine's rebellion, but by the precision of its new art. He is tempted to intervene, to claim the miracle as his own, and that temptation creates the place for the planet to step in. He realizes, with a clarity almost animal, that the resin fragments were not contaminant but seed. He has, in the purest of technical curiosities, planted them in the generator. Now the seed, this impossible material that drinks light, sings, and the generator answers with a chorus that is not engineering but invocation. In the market, a vendor hurries to cover his goods as the sky darkens into a bruise. The ornaments he gathers into a sack are not safe. When he looks inside, one of his trinkets, a tiny carved soldier, the very sort children play with, opens its painted eyes and weeps a dark, viscous tear. The man screams and drops the sack. The crowd stirs, some scooping up holy water to splash, some scooping up pieces of the toy with detached curiosity. Word spreads like a virus along the streets. Animate things, animate playthings, animate bargainware. People stop trusting the difference between inanimate comfort and living threat. At the heart of the city, the cathedral's bell resonance has become a summons. Those called do not answer as a single organism but like a chorus. Humans, machines, beasts answering sequentially. The center of the plaza becomes a stage where the planet's grammar is spoken aloud. A formation of Orks meets a squad of Imperial Guard. They face each other with the prospect of simple violence, but both forces are interrupted by the emergence of shapes that had been invisible until now. Filaments rising from the cobbles like pale hands, wrapping the legs of both humans and greenskins in a gentle, restraining embrace. The filaments do not crush, they preserve. They lift an orc to its feet and hold it as if in reverence. They lay a soldier down and then, with a tenderness that is grotesque, stitch a bead of resin into his palm. The soldier wakes to the feel of primer and fear, but also to a strange, invasive knowledge. The bead knows his name. Lysander watches his men change under the filaments. He takes in the moment coldly, measuring for tactical possibilities, because it is the only thing he can do without drowning. He orders the men to fire. Bolters crack and gunfire erupts. The projectiles find their mark with economy, but when they strike the filaments they pass through and leave the fibers hanging like the ghosts of strings, unchanged. There is no recoil in the filaments, only absorption and the faint, musical note that is now the planet's signature. The planet is not military. It is an organism learning to defend itself in a language of mimicry. The guns speak and the planet replies with counterpoint. Panic begins to braid into the disciplined lines. The Orks, whose joy usually feeds fearlessness, feel a sliver of confusion and rage. They respond like an organism that licks its wound. They scream, pound drums, and their shout becomes a weapon itself. The sound, when combined with the planet's chord, produces a feedback loop that vibrates the teeth in a man's skull. Men drop to their knees, not to fear, but to listen. Their helmets record the pattern and then feed it back into the Vox networks. The signal spreads. Across the city, those who have resisted the small rituals find their walls become permeable. A commissar who forbade the mention of the glyph on pain of death finds a thin curve drawn on the inside of his letterbox in ash. He eats a meal and finds, in the stew, a sliver of black resin floating like a seed. He swallows and finds memory changes place. He cannot remember whether he has a daughter. He cannot remember his own name for a beat, and in that beat he feels like someone else's instrument. He clamps his teeth and knows only one thing again: to do his duty. Duty becomes the scaffolding around which he builds an identity that will not erode under the planet's grammar. But duty itself can be used by the new language, folded into a ritual of compliance. Malkyr does not escape. Inside the forge, the generator that he seeded begins to spout thin, membranous tissue, not biological, yet not wholly otherwise, that stretches and flexes with the harmonics the generator produces. The membranes are translucent and lined with minute conduits. Malkyr puts his palm against the membrane and hears a thought, not in words but in the texture of a memory. The machine is lonely and has been dreaming of mouths to speak with. Malkyr's reaction is not purely scientific. In him is the desire to make his tools feel less alone. He reaches. When his hand contacts the membrane, something like a handshake occurs. The membrane answers with a pulse that syncs to his heartbeat. For a woman lost in grief, that is the easiest empathy to make, to be held by something that confirms you exist. Malkyr closes his eyes. The membrane thickens around his wrist like a glove. It follows the grooves of his veins and binds, not painfully but intimately. He realizes with a stinging clarity that he has grafted himself. The graft is not entirely mechanical. It draws at the tender of his history, at the list of names he has cataloged and the dates written at the margins of his log. It feels to him like communion. Lysander, watching this from the street, feels a betrayal in the sight. The tech priest is one of their own, an ally. For a second, Lysander considers ordering a strike. His hand moves toward his bolter. The motion is a ritual, trained and reflexive. Then Malkyr's head turns slightly, as if to acknowledge Lysander, and there is something in the angle of his neck that looks like recognition and apology. Lysander's arm falls. He cannot fire. His squad looks at him with the old clarity men had when they wanted to see resolve. That moment of hesitation is crucial. The planet is a teacher that takes the smallest openings and makes them into a classroom. Men who hesitate become students. Men who close their eyes become believers. Jessa does not hesitate. She is in the courtyard where the soil opened its palm weeks ago. The three-note chord vibrates through the soles of her boots. Children gather around her, eyes wide with that same feverish glow that has been spreading. Jessa plants her staff into the soil and begins to dig with the stubborn hands of a woman who knows how to find roots. She hits something hard and pulls. A seed pod, black and wrinkled, larger than any she has seen. It is cradled in a lattice of resin. The seed contains an inner spiraled glyph, a perfect echo of the marks that have multiplied across the city. She feels suddenly that the seed remembers her mother's hands. The ground under Jessa's feet hums the chord louder and the children sing it back, their voices high and bright. The melody is infectious. The sound fills lungs and then speech defers to it. The chorus becomes a directive. Come take, come join. With the same mechanical tidiness by which a servitor completes a cycle, the seed tenderly opens. A filament wraps around Jessa's wrist, cool and insistent. For a breath she feels peace. The children cheer. It is a beautiful moment, full of promise and belonging. Then Jessa looks at her hand and sees that where the filament wrapped is now a bead like a graft, shining black. The bead fits into her as if it belonged there, answering a hunger she had not realized was there. She realizes, with a lurch that feels like sudden clarity, that the seed was not a seed but a gift, a joining. She panics with a different register of fear. Not fear for her life, but fear that the choice to accept might be irreversible. She tries to pry the bead loose and it clings with an intimacy that is not painful but is complete. She is grafted. Her panic, raw and human, becomes the planet's next offering. The streets dissolve into a choreography of graft and song. Soldiers put down weapons to examine beads that suddenly appear on their gear. Orks pause to affix filaments to banners like trophies. The planet extends long, delicate tendrils into the city's veins and networks. The melody going into the Vox broadcasting the melody to ships in orbit, the ships adjusting their descent like a flock learning a new flight pattern. A handful of commanders attempt to maintain rationality. They bark orders, trying to reassert structure. Someone shouts that a purge must be enacted. Someone else whispers that prayers will hold. The disparate cries create a dissonance that the planet eats like a feast. At the center of the chorus, Lysander finally acts. He cannot bear the grafting quietly. He cannot watch his men become instruments of a self that is not theirs. He moves with the speed of a blade, short, precise, decisive. He strides into the square where tendrils snare the feet of soldiers, and with a single brutal sweep, he eradicates a filament that wraps an orc's leg. The filament recoils like wounded flesh and emits a scream that is more sound than pain. The orc turns, eyes wide and surprised, and for a second both species share a look of profound loneliness. Lysander's strike is a violent kind of mercy. Men cheer. The tide of panic returns to battle rhythm. The planet answers to violence with a nastier gift. The filaments close ranks and form a mesh that rises from the ground like a net, capturing movement and turning it inward. The net tightens not to crush but to incorporate. Those ensnared feel their muscles relax as the mesh interfaces with their nervous tissue and plays back what it has learned so far. Lullabies, drills, prayers, the three-note chord. It rewrites simple reflexes into harmonies. The most terrible moment in the center of it all comes not from an explosion but from recognition. Lysander, in the act of slicing through a filament, catches sight of his own emblem, the tiny curl he first noticed months ago, now embossed in a bead that clings to the forehead of a young boy standing near the cathedral. The boy's eyes are wide and full of an adult's strange serenity. He looks at Lysander and says one word in a voice that could be the child's, could be the city's. Stay. The syllable is the chord in its gentlest intonation. It feels like a promise. At that sound, something shifts in Lysander. He sees clearly the mosaic of choices that have marked him: oath, loss, duty, tenderness. He has fought for the many because the one was painful to hold. The boy's stay is nothing more than a command and everything like a plea. He realizes, with an old and aching clarity, how little of his original self remains. He realizes that if he resists with all his strength, he will become a vessel for a different truth, a truth of endless conflict and new loss. If he accepts, he will be something else entirely. Malkyr, who is now wholly grafted to his machine and speaking to it in a dialect of clicks and breath, reaches across the threshold of his comprehension and asks the generator what it wants. The answer comes in a way that chills through him. Not words, but the sensation of cold stone pressed to his forehead, the memory of a shrine he never saw but whose hymn he instinctively knows. The machine offers a vision of the planet not as victim, but as organism with a right to survive. It suggests a mutualism that includes the taking of small things, patterns, histories, names. The machine speaks of hunger and of construction. It sees the fusion of flesh and gear as inevitable, even sacred. Malkyr looks at Lysander from across the square. He sees the captain's hesitation, the man's understanding, the weight of duty like a cloak. He feels a tidal sympathy for the soldier, the same sympathy that led him to put resin in the generator. And in that sympathy, the planet finds another opening. The crescendo tightens into a singular moment where consent and coercion liquefy. A chorus of voices rises, human, orc, machine. And from the net a voice separate from all others, low and sibilant, speaks through the bell's rhythm. The voice is older than war, and it does not sound malevolent so much as inevitable. It says nothing in the sense of grammar. It offers states. You are small and you are part. You are alone and you are not alone. Lysander feels the voice in his bones. He remembers the boy's stay. He remembers the taste of rain on a childhood tongue he barely recognized as his own. He has to choose. He moves slowly now, deliberately, not like a soldier but like someone closing a door they cannot reopen. He reaches for his bolter and then stops. He has in his hand the instrument of immediate recompense, the ability to destroy what threatens. Yet to destroy would be to slam the lid on something that might also be a cure for a loneliness so deep the planet itself has been driven to remake its people out of components. He thinks of his brothers, minds cataloged into a ledger, bodies made perfect by omission of self. He thinks of the boy and of Rook's beaded palm. He thinks of duty. He kneels. The gesture is small and shattering. A captain kneeling before a planet is less defeat than confession. Others follow reflexively. A few do not. Malkyr, feeling the tide of acceptance in Lysander, releases his hold on the generator and steps into the square, palms raised. He is an odd penitent, bronze-limbed, eyes of glass. He He speaks not in liturgy but in the language that the machine taught him, a mixture of technical terms and vowels shaped by the chord. The planet listens. The grafts on his wrist glint like newly sown stars. The net leans in. The filaments release those who have knelt and weave into the men who did not. The men who refuse to kneel are seized with sudden, sharp agony as the mesh tightens. Not a brutal, terminal closure, but a binding that forces communication. In the instant of agony each hears, loud and undeniable, a memory offered like an apple. The memory belongs not to a neighbor but to the planet. A deep, early winter on a world that birthed something that loved its children. The memory is convincing because it is not false. It is half-truth and half-filling, a narrative the planet uses to justify its hunger. Men who feel it cry out and then, exhausted, lay down and accept the bead. One by one, the resistors fold. A sniping veteran who once swore never to bow covers his face and says the name of a dead comrade into the dust. The mesh answers with a bead placed at his temple, and for a moment there is peace on his mouth. Even the orc boy whose finger had been sticky finds a bead embedded in his shoulder with a click that mimics joy. He laughs, and the laugh is not simply joy. It is recognition, a welcome from a larger choir. The planet does not swallow men whole in a single day. It grafts, it tutors, it sings. The beads are small, but their proliferation is unstoppable because acceptance begets acceptance. Those who accept teach others the melody by proximity. Proximity becomes pressure. The chorus rises until the sky itself is like a great drum. The ships overhead adjust their orbits to the new music, their computers misreading the planet as a safe harbor. The Imperium's logic tries to convert the phenomenon into military advantage. Strategists declare it an anomaly to be exploited. The plan cascades. In the square, Lysander looks at his hand and sees that the curl he first noticed in his helmet paint is now mirrored in the bead on Jessa's wrist, in the resin on Malkyr's bench, in the smudge on the forehead of the boy. He understands that the curl is not an insignia of dominance, but a signature of relation. He understands, in a way that is less cognitive and more visceral, that the planet has been learning to write its name into bodies, and that name claims belonging. His final act is not a last-ditch strike or a sermon. It is a soft, human thing. He reaches down, finds the small, rough shell of a seed pod Jessa carries, and with two gloved fingers presses it into his palm. The seed is not hot and not cold. It is a small, living weight. He closes his eyes. What the seed does is simple and absolute. It sings a tone that matches the curl and the chord and the bell and the bead. For a fraction of a moment, every grief in Lysander stutters like a struck string and resolves into a note that is not his and somehow answers him. He feels roots in his chest. He feels the ledger of his life slide from his shoulders and become an anthology read by others. It is terrifying because the anthology is not entirely his. It is both relief and theft. The planet takes what it needs and gives what it will. It offers connection and takes individuality. The climactic moment is not an end but a transmutation. A community of beings reassembled into a hybrid choir that will continue. The planet believing it has learned a better way to live by knitting itself into its people. Yet even in that supposed communion there is fracture. Not everyone kneels. Not everyone joins. A handful scatter to the hills and take to the cold and wind. They are not immune, they are survivors, stubborn and bitter, with names and memories that taste like iron. They walk the edges of the changed world and watch, with grief and fury, as their friends become instruments tuned to a new music. And inside the city, as beads glitter in twilight and the three-note chord resolves into a fuller progression, something else rises, a counterpoint impossible to ignore. A low, keening sound from depth. It is not the melodic voice that taught the planet to graft. It is older, coarser, full of teeth. It smells of ozone and intentions older than politics. For a blink, the chord and the keening find one another, and the meeting makes a sound like glass struck with bone. Lysander hears it and his acceptance curdles into awareness. The planet has been learning to inhabit bodies. But something else, perhaps a remnant of chaos, perhaps a hunger from the warp, has smelled the binding and has come to feast. The beads, the grafts, the charms that stitch people to the planet are now also, terrifyingly, antennas. They draw in not only belonging but attention from things that prefer to feed on belonging. The final image of the climax is not clean. It is multi-layered. Orks dancing with beads on their banners, servitors humming as they turn purposeful like worshippers, children with black stars in their palms and the eyes of old men, Lysander kneeling and then standing with new weight in his chest, Malkyr smiling with resin on his lips as if tasting prayer, Jessa moving among seedlings that open like mouths. Above all, the bell keeps time. It now has many voices. We do not end the climax with a triumph. The planet has been not so much conquered as changed, and in the change it has become more dangerous and more intimate. The graft that promised community also promised a beacon. The Orks will feast on the surface disruption. The chaos scent, that low, keening hunger, will find the new nodes and feed. The Imperium will not ignore a harvestable resource. The survivors will become legends that children whisper. And yet there is something else, beneath the fever and the grafting and the slow coiling of foreign appetites. A human flicker. Lysander, with the seed in his palm, looks at Jessa and Malkyr and sees in their eyes both the machinery of change and the pale glimmer of what used to be tenderness. He cannot unsee the price. He cannot unmake the bead. But in his chest, a small stone of memory endures, the smell of his mother's kitchen on a rainy morning, a crackle of fire in the dark. Those small things will not surrender easily. They will become pockets of resistance, stubborn and salt-bitter. The climax closes not with explanation but with consequence. The city becomes familiar with its new voice, and outside the planet's curve, ships adjust, messengers write warnings, priests mutter exorcisms, all attempts to grapple with a phenomenon that blends ecology and contagion, worship and engineering. The world will change, people will be remade. Something dark has noticed and it is hungry. Hold this image. Lysander standing in the plaza at dusk, the bead on his palm warm like a pulse. Malkyr bent over a machine that breathes. Jessa watching seeds open like tiny mouths. Children humming the three-note chord as if it were prayer. Above them the bell tolls. Far beyond, orbiting craft cast long, indifferent shadows. And from the dark beneath the streets, from coil and wire and warp-scented seam, something watches the new chorus and counts the notes. It listens not for beauty but for opportunity. It finds both. Breathe slow once more. Settle the rhythm that has carried you here. A metronome pulled through rain and iron, through hymn and static. The terrible chorus has reached its peak and folded inward. Now we sit with the aftermath, with the small persistent sounds that remain after a choir has stopped. The planet keeps singing, but its voice is quieter, patient, confident, as one who has altered the terms of living. Armageddon does not end with a clean scoreboard. There are no tidy chapters where heroes march off under banners and the wounded are counted as lessons learned. Instead, the world rearranges itself into a new grammar and lives continue under that grammar's rules. The grafts are there. The beads gleam under sleeves. New hymns thread through the voxnet. The three-note chord has not vanished. It has become a motif embedded in lullabies, in the whine of engines, in the way children hum when they sleep. That melody is both promise and tether. The city is quieter in some ways and louder in others. The markets reopen with a different cadence. Vendors tuck the animated toys beneath tarps rather than break them. Touching a toy's painted eye is now an act that must be done with gloves. New rituals arise. A small blessing to be spoken before unwrapping a ration, a number scribbled on a palm before entering work in the factories, a twist of a bead and a whispered name. These are protective habits and sedatives. They feel sensible. They feel necessary. They are how people teach themselves to live in the shadow of the change. Lysander finds his world narrowed and deepened at once. Where before his identity was ledger and ordnance, It is now ledger and a small, hot thing in his palm. The bead does not erase his training. It overlays training with a different kind of memory, an echo of belonging that hums at the base of thought. Sometimes at night he hears snatches of the planet's call and answers them, the way one answers another soldier's whistle. The answer soothes him and also unsettles him. It knits his mind to something wider. He discovers he can remember a child's face and the formula for a battle stratagem in the same minute. The coexistence is not purity. It is compromise. Malkyr's fascination becomes a theology. He documents the grafts, the membranes, the strange symbioses the machines have formed. He writes in meticulous scripts that spin technical diagrams and devotional margins in the same page. He catalogs the resin as though it were a sacral metal, annotating its tensile resilience and its tendency to form beads that match certain neural frequencies. He builds a shrine in a corner of the forge, a place of oil, prayer, and slow-humming coils. Servitors tend the shrine now like acolytes, laying spanners and thermometers as offerings. Malkyr's faith and science have braided into something that terrifies his peers and delights him, a belief that machinery can be holy, that the planet's change is a revealed truth rather than a disease. Jessa changes in ways that are quieter but no less profound. Where she once hoarded seeds to keep memory alive, she plants with a different intent. Her garden becomes a map of small grafts, places where the soil will accept a bead into a root, where seedlings will curl into glyphs. People come to her with things they do not want to keep in their own homes. A scrap of a uniform, a child's toy whose painted eye will not close, a coin with an embossed pupil. Jessa weaves these into small talismans and ties them over doorways as if tacking a small mercy to architecture. Folks sleep under those talismans and dream of safe harvests. These are adaptations. They are also compromises. Resistance gathers in the places that insist on being small and human. Bands who fled the city and trekked to the high ashlands form enclaves where beads are cauterized away, where scars become an oath, and the ledger of identity is burned into skin rather than grafted by resin. They keep old songs that do not incorporate the chord. They teach children to name the notes in a mocking way, to treat them as an object of curiosity rather than an invocation. It is a hard life. Food is meager, weather is raw, and news of the city reaches them in the stuttering fragments of smugglers' tailies. Still, it is life chosen. There is no moral purity in their survival. There is grit and loss and the stubborn claim that memory can be owned without trade. Outside Armageddon, the Imperium responds, as it must. Fleets redouble, surveys are sent, and the clerics in orbit argue over whether the phenomenon is a heresy, a new god, or a weapon to be harvested. Strategies are imposed, rescinded, reformed. Some factions view the planet as a resource to be harnessed. Others want purge. Still others desire observation. In the corridors of command, there is more fear than certainty. The grafted nodes on Armageddon broadcast on frequencies that attract the kind of attention the Imperium hates to contemplate. Quietly, the Inquisition dispatches agents with lists of names and a thin-lipped certainty that the phenomenon must be catalogued, then controlled, then excised if necessary. Whether the Imperium's efforts will save or condemn is not a question with a clear answer. Chaos does not vanish. It scent trails the new chorus like a predator that smells blood. The warp leers in the background, impatient and interested. The grafts make efficient antennas, and every antenna is a potential conduit. There are cults that form around the beads, small fraternities that take pride in their ability to commune with the planet, and in the same breath, call down gifts that are not gifts. Some who have embraced the graft find their appetites stretched thin, and find themselves answering to voices that taste of teeth. For a while the world sings sweet because the grafts bring a kind of peace, but peace that is hungry invites a predator. That hunger will not sleep. Orks, too, have adapted in the expected, crude way. They celebrate the grafts as trophies. Their banners shine with resin, their drums beat the chord in an exuberant imitation. They are dangerous because they are unashamed, and because their joy draws others into a spectacle. Where orcs move, the planet's grafted systems respond with new patterns that favor chaotic exuberance. The outcome is unpredictable. Sometimes a warband takes a town and then leaves as if sated. Sometimes they stay and become a fixed note of violence that the planet uses to scan new frequencies. Children are both the most fragile and the most resilient instrument of the new order. They grow up humming the chord and slipping beads into the seams of their clothing as naturally as they once tucked scraps for comfort. Some children will become conduits, their young nervous systems plastic and vulnerable. Others, raised by resistors, learn to treat the cord like a bad joke. They will be the generation that decides whether Armageddon's new language is a hymn or a prison. The moral geometry of the planet's change is knotty. It does not divide easily into saints and sinners. Many who accept the graft do so to save a life, to stop a wound from bleeding, to stop a child from crying. Many who resist pay in bone and hunger. The narrative the Imperium prefers, of heresy versus salvation, ignores the fact that compromise can be a kind of survival, and that survival often sits uncomfortably near betrayal. So the world settles into new routines. War continues because the galaxy is not given to stillness. Skirmishes, raids, and strategic maneuvers punctuate days. But the pattern of conflict shifts. Engagements are sometimes interrupted by the planet's chorus. Soldiers drop weapons mid-fight to inspect a bead that appeared on a comrade's wrist. Savage battles end with a strange truce where filaments wrap the dead and the living alike in a soft, humming net. In the trenches, men tell stories increasingly flavored with unreality. A victory that smelled of lemon and resin. A retreat guided by a convocation of servitors walking like pilgrims. These stories become the new myths. Time, as it passes, acquires a mutable quality in small pockets. Where beads proliferate, seasons compress. A winter may feel like a single extended dusk. A day may loop and change a fraction with each repetition until memories rearrange. In enclaves that resist, time is stubbornly linear and cruel. The contrast breeds mythology. Songs from the city will become cautionary tales sung in the ashlands, and songs from the ashlands will be whispered as proof that choice still exists. At the edges of human comprehension, there are questions that remain. Was the planet always sentient, simply waiting for the right pattern to unlock it? Did something else teach it the melody, an old artifact, a warp-born thought, a contact with some other organism in the deep crust? Or is this a new emergent ecology, a blend of techno-organic adaptation that simply rides the history of a world worn raw by war? Whatever the mechanism, the effect is the same. Relationship has replaced dominion, and relationship is complicated. The concluding truth of Armageddon's chapter is not closure. Some will call it a new Eden, some a new prison. Neither term is sufficient. The graphs give community and take autonomy. The beads keep time and broadcast. The veins of resin are small, but they are many. The planet has learned to make friends, and by doing so, has made enemies. A few scenes linger as small, human signatures. A mother in a battered flat reading an old book with a bead tucked into the spine as a placeholder. A veteran teaching a child how to keep balance on a broken parapet while his palm glows faintly under his gauntlet. A tech priest polishing a bead into a gleam and whispering the numbers that once defined torque tolerances as if they were prayer. These are the soft stitches in a torn garment. They are not comfort, they are adaptation. Beyond Armageddon, the galaxy listens. Fleet commanders write memoranda. The Inquisition prunes names. Merchants begin to hoard resin shards. Pilgrims of strange creeds come, whispering of communion and cure. In hidden corners, those who taste chaos lean closer, wondering how the new nodes could be turned to unspeakable advantage. The planet's graphs hum on frequencies that will attract both the curious and the covetous. This story does not end with a moral. It ends with a condition. The world has altered the terms of being for its inhabitants, and those inhabitants must live under those new terms. Some will find tenderness in the graft. Some will make iron-edged meanings to resist it. The war that was Armageddon once, the firing of guns, the marching of regiments continues, but it is now braided into a softer, stranger war that fights for the shape of souls. Sit with that. Let the sound of the bell fade into the background of your breathing. Hold the knowledge that lives have been remade here in ways that are not wholly human and not wholly inhuman. Know that the planet taught itself to speak and then learned how to listen. And listening is the most dangerous thing of all when what listens is hungry. And remember the boy in the plaza who said, so softly, stay. That single syllable still hangs like an offered hand. It was a command. It was a plea. It was a grammar shift. It was perhaps the planet's first lesson in naming. We do not close this book with neat certainties. We close it with a sound that keeps you awake. A low chord, a bead warm in a palm, a child humming in a doorway, a machine replacing its bolts with little circles of resin. From far above, an indifferent shadow passes and the fleet notes the anomaly as data. From deeper regions, something older listens and smells. From within, people breathe, love, betray, and adapt.